Hi everyone, it's Dr. Tom O'Brien. I think I'm live now. We've just had a world of problems trying to get this thing to work. It's my first time, so hopefully you've had patience with this. And I'm assuming this is working. Honey, would you check on your phone to see if this is working? And you'll check it and see? Okay. We are on our honeymoon in Costa Rica, and so there are some technical difficulties, but here we are. So I'm going to assume this is working, and we're going to town. I can just see me, and I think that, I look okay, but here we go. So this is about how to achieve compliance with working on an autoimmune protocol, whether it's with a gluten sensitivity or any other sensitivity or whatever has been identified as the mechanism contributing to the health issue that you're wanting to deal with. So the first thing I have to say is that you need to know what the health issue is that you're wanting to deal with. So just one moment, we're pausing. Is this working? Do you see me? Oh, okay, she needs to check on her phone. You need to know what the health issue is. So to say, I've got diabetes or I've got headaches or something like that is not going to work for someone to stay focused and compliant. That we have to understand that by the time you get symptoms, unless it's an acute trauma like you fell down and hurt yourself or broke a leg or something, unless you have an acute symptom, it's working? Oh, great. Well, hello, it's working. All right, good. So unless you have an acute symptom, you've got a chronic symptom. So a chronic symptom, by definition, means that it's been building up for a while. But your symptoms may have just started. I'm going to pause for a minute. Can you get me a little towel? Because I'm sweating, a little bit nervous, but also the weather. It's really hot here. It's 94 here today. So you've got a chronic condition. That means that it was building up before you ever had any symptoms. So when you have something building up before you have symptoms, then there's a mechanism going on that you don't know about that's going on. If you understand that there's a mechanism going on, then the question is, what's the mechanism? Once you know what the mechanism is, then it makes sense when you get the information. So the next step is, all right, now I understand there's a mechanism going on. How do I fix the mechanism? So once you understand how to fix the mechanism that's out of balance, then you understand why you need to do ... Whether it's food selections that need to change, or lifestyle habits, or environment, whatever it is. But if you don't understand the mechanisms behind it, and you don't need to be a geek to dial this down. You don't need to know all the intricacies of it. You just need to know the basics. So how do you know the basics? You know the basics by looking at the dashboard of your body. I'd use the analogy a lot that when you are driving your car, there's two types of messages that can come on the dashboard as to when your engine is overheating. You can have a hot light that comes on the dashboard. When a hot light comes on the dashboard, you need to pull over really quick. That's the same as getting symptoms. When you get symptoms, you need to pull over really quick and figure out what's going on. Other cars on their dashboard have a temperature gauge, and you can see the temperature gauge slowly start to creep towards the red zone before the engine's overheating. That happened to us back in 1986, 87. We had a Chrysler minivan. It was a summer day coming back from a vacation, and it was a 90-90 day in the Midwest, 90 degrees, 90% humidity. I had the air conditioning on, cruising down the highway about 70, and then I said, oh, no. And my wife said, why, what's wrong? And I said, the engine's climbing up towards the red zone, because it had the gauge, and I could see the gauge was going up. And so I had to turn off the air conditioning, open all the windows, listen to the kids complaining about how hot it was, slow down to 55, but then we were able to drive home and not get stuck in Gary, Indiana, which was where we were on the highway when this happened, driving back to Chicago. Your body's the same way. You've got temperature gauges that will tell you what's going on before the hot light comes on the dashboard, before you've got migraines, before you've got recurrent miscarriages, before you've got joint pains, before you've got chronic fatigue, before you've got an autoimmune disease you're diagnosed with. So we need to look at the dashboard and read temperature gauges. What does that mean? Well, that's the world of predictive autoimmunity. And if you listen to some of the interviews I've done that are on our website, theDr.com, on predictive autoimmunity, I go into it in detail. I don't want to take a lot of time here today. All that information is available for free for you. Right now, I want to give you the big kahuna overview here. I'm told these live chats should be 15 minutes or less, so I think some of you know I can talk, and I'm really happy to talk. And if I get a whole bunch of questions at the end, I'll stay with it and I'll do it. But for now, it's the world of predictive autoimmunity that you look in your bloodstream, you get a blood test done, and it looks for antibodies that are attacking your brain, or antibodies attacking your heart, or antibodies attacking your joints, or antibodies attacking your muscles, or antibodies attacking your bones. Do you get the message? That your immune system that's there to protect you will tell you where the problem is and where it's developing. When you've got elevated antibodies, you're killing off more tissue than you're regenerating. I had 3 elevated antibodies to my brain. That meant my brain was being killed off. And the antibodies would have caused MS, it would have caused dementia, non-Alzheimer's dementia, or it would have caused numbness and tingling throughout my body as it killed off more of my brain cells, It would take 20 years, 30 years, but that's the mechanism that was going on for me. For you, it might be your heart, or your lungs, or your liver, or your bones. We call that the weak link in the chain. Now, there's a whole bunch of things coming in here. Oh, Lisa Osan says, love to hear what you say. Brilliant. Thank you. So there's a bunch of comments. Thank you all so much. I'm told I'm to remind you, please click the like button or the the follow button. I don't know this stuff. Click the follow button so that you'll get notices when this stuff's happening in the future. I'll do this more often if you guys like it. And the way I know if you guys like it is if you leave comments and you click the follow button. That's the feedback loop. So let's go back to the big picture is you have to read the dashboard. You have to be able to read the dashboard. And those are the blood tests that are available. Cyrex Array number 5 is the current blood test available. And there's some other ones coming soon that are a little more specific than Array number 5 from Cyrex. So there's a number of tests that are available to read the dashboard. Currently, Cyrex number 5, Array number 5 is the go-to test to read the dashboard on your body. You can find out more about that on theDr.com. It's there. Get the information. Go to cyrexlabs.com, download it, take it to your doctor and say, doctor, please order this test for me. I want to understand what's cooking in my body right now before the tissue gets killed off. And your doctor won't know what you're talking about, but there's articles on my site you can use. There's one article called The Conundrum of Gluten Sensitivity, Why the Tests Are Often Wrong. And that explains about these tests. The secret to successful compliance. Oh, that's right. That's what this is supposed to be about. My wife is telling me. The topic here is the secret to successful compliance. So the secret to successful compliance is first to understand why you need to comply. So I just did 5 or 10 minutes on why you need to comply. The next secret to successful compliance, I made a few notes here, is to understand it's not as easy. Let's say it's wheat, and many of you have heard me speak about wheat. For those of you that hadn't, for now, if you can just accept the premise of what I'm about to say, and all the studies are available to read about this, every human has a problem with wheat. Harvard published the studies. Every human gets intestinal permeability every time you eat wheat. Every human, every time. And it's within 5 minutes of the wheat peptides, the proteins of wheat, getting into the gut. And there's videos on this. 5 minutes, you get intestinal permeability. Now, the fastest growing cells in the body, the inside lining of the gut, every 3 to 7 days you have a whole new lining. So you eat wheat, you tear the lining, but it heals. You have a sandwich for lunch, you tear the lining, it heals. You have pasta for dinner, you tear the lining, it heals. One day you don't heal anymore. And when that happens, now you've got pathogenic intestinal permeability. Now the cascade begins. And wherever the weak link is, that's where it's going to occur. Why do I tell you all that? Because everyone needs to give up wheat if you're dealing with an autoimmune mechanism. So once you've looked at the dashboard and you see you've got elevated antibodies, wheat is one of the things that everybody needs to give up, because the intestinal permeability is the gateway into the development of the autoimmune mechanisms. All the studies are out there on this stuff, and it's on many of my interviews, so you guys can follow up and get validation of this before you make these lifestyle changes, and I fully understand the reason why. Marzi, would you read the comments that are coming in and then just write notes to me or something? And so I can't read, it's too small on my phone. I tried to do this on my laptop, it didn't work. That's why we were late, is that I had to get on the phone, but I had to upgrade the app on the phone because my app was an old app for Facebook, blah, blah, blah. So the first thing about compliance is you have to stop throwing gasoline on the fire, whether you like it or not. Now, there are some doctors out there that say when you're going to give up wheat, you have to give up all grains. There is credibility to those statements. There's a lot of credibility to it because most grains have cross-contamination. Most grains also have gluten, but it's that gluten's not bad for you. Bad gluten is bad for you, which means the gluten proteins in wheat, rye, and barley. The gluten proteins in rice are not bad for you if you have a wheat sensitivity, unless there's some contamination. The gluten proteins in corn are not bad for you unless there's some contamination. But people are also sensitive to corn. They're also sensitive to rice. It's a different topic than being sensitive to wheat, but that's why so many people get really good results when they go completely grain-free. It makes a lot of sense to do this. When you've got the temperature gauge on your dashboard that's gone into the red zone, you've got elevated antibodies, but you don't have symptoms yet. First thing, you need to understand, this is a problem. It's not going to go away. You may feel fine now, but that's not going to last for long. And in the world of predictive autoimmunity, we now know about how long, depending on which antibodies they are. The thyroid antibodies, 7 years from when they first elevate. And you've got Hashimoto's thyroid disease, 7 years. Celiac's the same, 7 years. Crohn's, 3 years. You have elevated ASCA antibodies, ASCA antibodies within 3 years. You've got Crohn's. So it depends on which antibodies as to how long it's going to take before you feel bad. But when you've got elevated antibodies, everybody's got some antibodies. It's normal to have some. But when they're elevated, you need to pay attention, or it's going to force you to pay attention down the road. So the first thing on compliance is stop throwing gasoline on the fire. Stop eating the foods that have been identified as causing problems. And if you read my book, The Autoimmune Fix, you see very clearly wheat, dairy, and sugar are the three to give it a shot. Get them out of there for 3 months. Just give it a shot. Oh, no, wait, I say 3 weeks. And, okay, she's asking me to move over because the sun is cooking me. So how's that? Is that better? Okay, that's better for me. Thank you. So wheat, dairy, and sugar. 3 weeks to give it a shot to see how you feel. A few months, and you'll notice the antibodies come down. They don't come down that quick, 3 weeks. None of them do. The lifespan of the antibodies is somewhere between 2 to 4, maybe 5 months. With a single exposure, by the way. So you give up wheat, but you know, it's Sunday, the brunch, and the family's there. You say, oh, I'll have a bite of that croissant. When you get 1/8 of a thumbnail worth of wheat, when you've given up wheat, and the antibodies have started coming down, 1/8 of a thumbnail, and you activate the immune response now for another 2 to 4 or 5 months. From someone put croutons on the salad, you pick the croutons off and get rid of them, and then eat the salad. The crumbs in the greens is all it takes to activate an immune response if you have that sensitivity. So you have to be squeaky clean. One of the obstacles to compliance is that people just don't feel good. You know, they give up wheat, they don't notice a difference. They give up dairy, they don't notice a difference. And so, you know, I tried this for a few weeks, I don't feel any different. And so they go back and they have it again because they're not getting a positive reinforcement in how they feel. The primary reason for that they're not feeling a difference, is they're still getting exposure. They're still throwing gasoline on the fire, or there's something else that they're eating that they're also sensitive to. Let's take the second one first. If you're also eating something that you're sensitive to, let's say it's nightshade vegetables, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant. If you happen to have a sensitivity to that, and wheat and dairy, and you take wheat and dairy out, but you're still eating potatoes, that may be enough to still be throwing gasoline on the fire. And it's the Sid Baker rule. Dr. Sid Baker, one of the founders of functional medicine, he came up with the TACS rule, T-A-C-K-S. The TACS rule says, if you sit on 2 tacks, it takes a whole lot of aspirin to make it feel better. Sitting on one, you take 1 tack out and you sit on just 1 tack, it doesn't reduce the pain by 50%, right? So you're sensitive to 3 foods. In this example, you take 2 foods out, you don't get 100% better. You still have the inflammatory cascade going on. So if you don't notice that you're feeling better within 3 weeks on wheat, dairy, sugar, there's something else in there. That doesn't mean that those aren't the problem. It means there's something else. And that is a primary mechanism to consider when looking at how come I'm not feeling better. So one of the reasons for lack of compliance is that you don't notice a difference when you're working really hard to do these things. The second component to not feeling better, the first component, the second one was another food that you're sensitive to. Or it could be the house you live in that's moldy and you keep smelling the mold, and that's throwing gasoline on the fire. It's not just foods, it's environment. Usually it's foods, but it could be the environment also, like a moldy house. The first one, though, is cross-contamination, meaning the foods you're eating have some wheat residue in it or some dairy residue in it. And that's a huge problem, and there's lots of studies that talk about how big that problem is. You can see on my website there's a bunch of references and articles that you can read on that. So I won't take the time now. They're all there for free for you. But when you have a cross-contamination, and it's so very common, the FDA, they looked at 286 gluten-free foods, labeled gluten-free. 97.3 of them were gluten-free. That meant 3% were not. And if you got one of those 3% of the foods, you're toast. That's a pun. But your inflammatory cascade's activated. And then they looked at 180 naturally gluten-free foods, like rice cakes, where the ingredients are rice, salt, and water. Well, there's no gluten in there. There's no bad gluten in there. But out of the 180 foods they looked at that were naturally gluten-free, 24.3% of them had toxic levels of gluten in them. So 1 out of 4 of the naturally gluten-free foods had toxic levels of gluten. That's why some other doctors out there say you got to get rid of all grains. And there's validity to that concept. It's really hard to give up all grains, though, and some people need to. That's why the paleo diet works so well, the autoimmune diet works so well, the GAPS diet works so well. Those diets take all grains out, and that's one reason why, is that you don't get the cross-contamination that you do when you go gluten-free, gluten dairy-free. You still can get cross-contamination. Big problem. I spent years working on that problem, and we finally came up with an enzyme that works. Now, I'm not here to sell you enzymes, but they really do work. It's called E3 Advanced Plus. And if you're a healthcare practitioner, you can go to Numedica and get the product, order it yourself. They call it Glutenza. But on our site, it's called E3 Advanced Plus. And it works. You take one of those anytime you're eating grains or nuts or seeds, and you're protected. It'll do 99% full digestion of up to 10 milligrams of gluten. That's a slice of whole wheat bread. Now, don't you dare go out and eat a slice of whole wheat bread and take the enzymes. Don't you dare. But you take this, we take it every time we go out to eat before you start eating, because you want it at the bottom of all that food so nothing gets into the small intestine that activates the immune response. You take it before you start eating. All other digestive enzymes you take in the middle of meals, but this one you take before. So that's the first mechanism, is cross-contamination. It's impossible to avoid in our society today. The best of efforts, you're still going to get cross-contamination. That's why E3 Advanced Plus is such a great product. I'm very proud of it. So you can use that. If you're not going to go completely grain-free, then use that. Now I'm going to take a minute here and look at some of the comments. Do Cyrex test for other food sensitivities? Yes, they do. And here's a whole nother world of discussion, and we've got videos on my site for this. When you test for food sensitivities, you're testing for the proteins in foods is the immune system reacting to the proteins. Well, proteins change when you cook them. Everybody knows that. Well, but the antigens that the laboratories buy to test for chicken are raw chicken and raw beef. How many of you eat raw chicken? Not many. Well, why are we testing for sensitivity to raw chicken? So you get false negatives often. That's why, and you'll see on my website, is the Cyrex food panel. It's number 20, is that right? Or number 11? I'm supposed to know what it is. I'm sorry, I don't remember the number. No, it's not the chemical ones, but it's cooked and raw foods. 10. That's 10, number 10. Cooked and raw foods. Cooked chicken, raw chicken. Cooked beef, raw beef. And so that it's a much more comprehensive view of looking for food sensitivities. That was a good question. Shelley Winters-Rodell says, true story, Doc. Well, thank you, Shelley. Is it possible to be allergic to onions? It's possible to be allergic to anything. Yes, it is. I personally have a problem, but it's not an allergy response. It's a gallbladder problem. So if you can burp up the taste of bacon,